Hey, welcome. I'm Chase Cunningham, Dr. Cunningham, if you want to be formal. I'm here with John Kindervag and Klint Walker. We're going to talk about zero trust, OT, ICS, and applying this critical strategy to those particular environments. And I'm glad to have these guys here because I got the godfather of ZT and I got somebody that knows what's really going on. So if you guys wouldn't mind, just give a quick run through on kind of who you are and how you view OT ICS, just broad perspective.
So I'll start. John Kindervag here, Forrester analyst formerly, and that's where I created Zero Trust. Wrote the first paper in 2010. Spent 8.5 years there. Went to Palo Alto Networks, 4 years there. Now I'm at a company called Onto It, where I do managed services for Zero Trust. And at all of those organizations, I've done a lot of OT environments. Zero Trust works great for OT, OT, IoT, IIoT, whatever acronym you want to throw at it, it works.
And my name is Klint Walker, and I am with the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency. I am what is known as a cybersecurity advisor for Region 4. So I cover, North Carolina, South Carolina, Florida, Georgia, Mississippi, Alabama, Kentucky, and Tennessee. And we deal both with traditional IT systems and OT systems as part of our securing of the national critical infrastructure. And we're seeing the convergence of these two systems coming together. And then the myriad of problems that come with that as we're trying to develop something new across, not just the United States, but the world on how we're going to view security in this space.
So let me start with you, Klint, because I know John so well. I could probably say exactly what he's going to say, but you're the guy that's actually doing the CISA side of this, and I think CISA is doing interesting work. So, in your perspective from the CISA side, how do y'all see zero trust as applied strategically to this space? Is it a real thing? Does it make sense? Is this just vendor marketing? Like, what's your perspective on ZT?
Oh, we're behind it 100%. I mean, not just for, IT systems, but especially in the OT systems. One of the things I've been working on recently, I've been working with a lot of different universities as we even look at the IEC 62443 and how the convergence of zero trust with that framework, or, looking at the NIST 800-207 and how zero trust is going to impact 800-207, or actually how they work together. Because I think the synergies are there between all those different frameworks. And I think that that's actually the best application of those frameworks is to use the zero trust model. And I think that that's what we're really leaning toward is how can we help organizations? I think that's what President Biden is really pushing for too, is zero trust architecture, regardless of whether you're a traditional IT, a blended or hybrid environment, or if you're an OT or ICS environment.
And John, I know I'm leading the witness here, but your perspective on zero trust is what?
Well, that it just works. I mean, actually, Klint mentioned 62443, and I've written on that. I've written a white paper on how zero trust enables 62443. So, like an interesting thing, just to step back related to CISA, I was on the President's National Security Telecommunications Advisory Council subcommittee for zero trust and trusted identity management. Boy, there's a short title. You government people are good at the short, spiffy titles. But anyway, out of that, we wrote what we all now, and Chase briefed that, and a lot of CISA people were there, NSA, DOD, DISA, and we defined that as the authoritative report on what zero trust is. And 62443 has a concept of a conduit, which is the policy statement on how traffic can move to an OT environment. And if you look at the NSTAC report or anything that I've written, you'll see a thing called the Kipling method policy. So Kipling method is based upon a poem by Rudyard Kipling where he gave us who, what, when, where, why, and how. Who should have access via what application? Where is that access? Where is that resource located? And how should we look at it? What criteria? How should we inspect it? All that kind of stuff. And working with the 62443 folks, they pointed out that a conduit and a Kipling method policy are exactly the same thing. So it really simplifies doing zero trust really simplifies doing OT because you can define a protect surface. What are you going to protect? That's That's the critical infrastructure piece, whether it's a manufacturing device, whether it's a SCADA system, whether it's an oil rig. I mean, I've done all of those things. And then you can build out from there and then define that policy, whether you call it a Kipling method policy, whether you call it a conduit, and then you can monitor that for malicious behavior and anything that you need to do to update it. And that falls within the 5 steps of zero trust map that I created back at Forrester, and Chase worked on that too when he took over for me at Forrester. So it just all kind of flows together.
Yeah, so I think that's the way I see it too. And Clint, I want to pose a pretty direct question here, because CISA is doing really good work, but I spend a lot of time looking around on the net and dark side and whatever else for vulnerable systems, and I notify people. And like right now, the point I'm trying to basically kind of set the stage here, right? So like right now, looking for a critical ICS SCADA configuration that's vulnerable, that's exposed to the internet. I won't put specifics in there because I don't want to get myself in trouble, but like in the United States right now, I see 14,300 of these things that are flat out misconfigured, shouldn't be doing the things that they're doing, talking to the internet. Why is this continue to be such a problem for organizations? Like, I know unequivocally I could, if I was in a position, apply zero trust concepts and principles and at least get those things off of the internet. And this continues to be just prolific. Where is CISA in that thing? Isn't there, I mean, you guys are engaging in ZT. Isn't there a push from CISA to say, look, if you're operating this manner, you're violating ZT principles, do something? Or is it just too big a problem?
I don't think it's too big of a problem. And I think actually that's going to be our main focus this year. And I think that we're really on the cusp of, we like to say here in the federal government, especially at CISA, that we're a voluntary program, that we're out here to help preach and teach people on how to do cybersecurity better. But you're noticing, like with the recent regulations and stuff like that, is we're at that breaking point where if people don't do things voluntarily, there's going to have to be a regulation that makes them do it. And so we've really been focusing, because we'd really like to stay on the voluntary side of things. And that's why we're really working closely with the FBI, Secret Service, and a lot of other organizations to do what we call targeted identity or targeted victim notification, where we're saying, hey, if we notice that you have some of these, outliers, if you're showing that you have indicators of compromise or that you have a unpatched system, we're going to notify you. And that's a lot of what the CSAs are doing out there now, is we're working on a strategy on how we're going to, talk to these companies and show them the importance of patching their systems and how they can patch it, or how they can put other mitigating factors if they need that particular thing open for operations, or how they can do things better, because it's a shared risk now. It's not just a risk to one organization. As we've seen with recent attacks, you can have one organization get hit with something, but it's going to have a cascading or a domino effect to everybody else, not just in that critical service sector, but in every other critical service sector. So these, targeted entity notifications are going to be coming a lot, and we just have to figure out how we're going to do that in the most efficient manner, where people trust that it's coming from us. Because we understand that at some point, people might even start to spoof that they are from CISA and start to notify you, hey, we need you to make a change to something. And so we need to find a way to do it. Again, the zero trust of how we're going to do, targeted entity notification. So we're trying to get all that groundwork laid. We've already started that whole process. I think we've done great work over the last couple of months, even of letting people know that, hey, you're vulnerable to certain. And a lot of that's coming in from our intelligence community partners too, or the people who do bug bounties, or just people like you who are researching all this stuff and getting us the information. How do we validate it? And how do we get that out to the public as fast as possible? So it is a challenge, but I think it's one that we're ready to overcome.
Well, I'm glad to hear that that's the approach. I guess the follow on to that is, when will there be, in your estimation, like teeth to those things? Because right now, like, I notify people all the time about their vulnerable stuff. They send me cease and desist letters. And I mean, I'm a nobody, right? You guys are a government entity, but my question kind of is, if we know that they're vulnerable systems, and we know that there's a fix, and we know that there's a strategy that can unequivocally eliminate or at least exponentially reduce the risk, when is it going to be, CISA gave you 90 days to patch this, you chose not to, you're getting fined, I don't know, 1% of the company value per day until this is fixed? Because it's, like you said, systemic risk. I'm looking at stuff right now that is building automation, including air conditioning and fire control systems. There's 14,000 potential targets for me. it could be a really bad Friday afternoon if I decided to, just go bonkers.
So I think that's coming, but I think that that's where we need help and partnership with the community to say, how can we apply teeth? I mean, because if you're talking about a fine, how many large companies out
Fines
there
don't
will
work. No one cares.
hey,
No
I'll
one
just set
cares.
aside money for a fine. I'll pay the fine and move on. And we risk putting small businesses out of business because they don't have the manpower, the capabilities to patch or to take care of that. So we've got to find that common ground on how we can approach this, having teeth behind it, but also leveraging the community to say, hey, we all acknowledge that you have a vulnerability that you're not patching, and we're going to speak with our money and not partner with you, or to push leverage from your vendors, your suppliers, everybody else in your industry to make you do the work as well. Because I don't think a fine is going to be enough.
Yeah,
it's got to be a joint effort, a combined effort, and that's what we're working on. That's why we're bringing people like John in to work with us to say, how can we do this better? Because the teeth can't come just from the federal government. It's got to come from the community.
So, John, with that being said, your perspective on what should be a requirement for ZT for these types of environments?
So, OT is an especially challenging problem. And if I can step back and kind of put it into a little bit of perspective, it's been around for a long time. We've called it all kinds of things, but it tends to be kind of a distinct part of the IT operations, actually its own system, or at least thought to be its own system. And it has very old school people doing old school things. So there's a thing called the Purdue model on how you're supposed to do OT security and OT. And that thing was, I think, created in the 80s, right? So it's not particularly applicable, but you find a lot of people who won't let go of that, which is the reason people are doing 62443. That's why it came out. So that's one thing. But the traditional ways of doing security, like patching, typically don't work in a lot of OT systems. I'm going to just draw a system how I got involved in this years and years ago. I was doing a workshop in Zero Trust for a massive company, and there was they do manufacturing. And I didn't know that I was going to be involved in the manufacturing discussion. I thought this was for Zero Trust for the internal network. But lo and behold, sitting in this room was the head of manufacturing, the global vice president, and 99% of the revenues were coming from manufacturing. And so what happens is, you have a manufacturing device, right? We'll just call it M for manufacturing machine. And it has a computer that has some kind of a device, PLC, a HMI, a specific device for OT, to control and make this machine work, right? So it's all computerized. And then somewhere down here, we'll put them over there. And by the way, this is the protect surface. And when you're whiteboarding, just for people watching, if you're whiteboarding Zero Trust, on the left side, you start with the protect surface, not the edge, because the edge is the thing we're doing last. So you have a person here who's going to be the person controlling the machine. And that's a very simplified diagram. And typically, this machine might have access to the internet. Look at me. I'm going to be a radical and put it at the
your
bottom
drawing
of the
skills
screen.
are awesome. This is yeah.
Thank you. There's a joke about eating crayons in there somewhere, I think. But so here's the problem. This was running Windows XP at the time, and okay, we need to upgrade because it's not going to be around. We need to upgrade it to Windows 7. And so the IT people are all upset at the manufacturing people and because they won't upgrade it to Windows 7. And the VP of manufacturing says, well, you realize that the PLC manufacturer doesn't make a driver for Windows 7. So we can't upgrade it. So how should we do this? And so here was the IT's person response. Well, you should rebuild all the software in secure Linux. Like there's thousands of these, right? That's $1 billion project. And so the guy said, well, John, how would you do it? Right. And I said, well, I'd put some sort of control here, right? We'll just say it's a control, and it could be multiple different kinds of things. So I don't care about this. I'm going to define this area as my protect surface. And then that control is going to talk to the computer that runs the PLC. And then inside this control, we're going to have a Kipling method policy, right? That only allows a few people, like this person, to get access via a specific protocol. So this is the who statement. The what statement is the protocol, right? So like Modbus. So this uses Modbus. And so only a few people running on the protocol Modbus can access this PLC and let it come through. And so it's a very simple thing. And the VP of IT, or actually executive VP of manufacturing, said, okay, this workshop is over. And I'm like, oh man, what did I do? How did I make this guy mad? And he said, all you IT people, you leave, except for this one dude who's the guy who brought me in. He became the hero. And the three of us are going to design the system, and we're going to tell all of you IT guys how it's going to be done from here on out, because I'm tired of all of this stuff where you don't understand how we make money, what the business is about. So IT doesn't have, OT doesn't have some of the ability to just patch something or make an easy fix. So you have to think about how the system flows and what needs to be protected in the OT world. And whether it's a PLC or an HMI or blah, 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 all these buzzwords, putting them inside of a protect surface and putting some sort of appropriate control based upon how the system works is what you need to do. And I can't specify what that system which would be, in NIST terms, they call that policy enforcement point.
Yep.
I typically call it a segmentation gateway, because it's some sort of gateway that is designed to segment networks. But whatever that device is, or that system is, or that software is, it's going to be based upon what you're trying to protect. And that's what people don't get. They focus on the technology and not what they're actually trying to protect. And so different HMI PLCs, different an MRI system might work different than a wireless infusion pump. I'm doing one I was talking to a hospital system, and I asked them, what's the most important thing we need to secure for you? And I thought they were going to say the patient database, the EMR, electronic medical records system. And he said, oh, the computer system that controls the elevators. And I said, really? He said, oh yeah. If elevators don't work, patients don't move. And if patients don't move, they die. That's the most critical system in any hospital. And I'd never heard that before, because this was the CTO of the hospital, not just the CIO or the IT person. He understood every single function in patient care. And so for me, that was an eye-opening experience. And it's a really interesting thing to think about. Oh, if you take down the elevators, you could kill people.
Yeah. So Klint, how does an organization like CISA describe the issues that John is talking about and get them to actually know that, like he was saying, that this is not a beyond the scope of possibility problem to solve? Do you guys talk about the technology offering, or is it you guide their thinking on the strategy side? How does that play out?
So we offer a wide variety of services at CISA. We have strategic level services and tactical. The tactical are more technical or IT based, and everybody flocks toward the tactical first. And we always tell them, hey, you're going to get a lot more out of our strategic service offerings. We're going to help you. I always say that building a cybersecurity program is like, building an airplane while you're flying it. And our strategic services are actually showing what the airplane looks like at the end, so you know what you're building toward. Because most people don't understand what they're building toward. They don't understand what's important. I like to use that old adage, if you've heard that story about for want of a nail, the shoe was lost. Well, I updated that recently in a talk that I did, and I had this big thing. It says, for want of the data, the asset was lost. For want of the asset, the process was lost. Without the process, you didn't have a system. Without the system, you don't have an operation. Without operations, you don't provide a service. And without a service, you lose your mission. All because of the data. And people lose sight of that. Nobody cares that you lost a laptop. You can replace a laptop easily, but what data was on that laptop? And as John was saying, I mean, it's all about understanding what's important. When I do assessments of organizations, one of the first things I used to do is I'd go into like their IT shop and I'd say, what does this company do? Most people in the IT department couldn't tell me what the company's, mission really was.
Right. You get blank stares. Yeah.
How are you building an operational environment if you don't understand what the mission is? Like, is the elevator the most important thing? I'd love to go into a bank and you talk to the bank teller. What's the most important thing that this bank does? Oh, personal banking, because our customers come in, we're the focal point. You talk to the branch manager, he's going to say, oh, we actually make all of our money on commercial banking. And then you talk to maybe the division manager and they say, oh no, we make all of our money on, loans and stuff like that. And then you talk to the head of the bank, he's like, oh, we make it all on futures and on, property. And it's like, okay, so when you talk about that, the people that the users and operators are your first line of defense, they're all protecting the wrong thing. So when we look at things from cybersecurity standpoint, from CISA, is we always talk about asset management. It's going back to the tenets of, kind of zero trust is, do you really know what you're trying to protect? And you notice I didn't say inventory management, I said asset management, because everybody says, hey, I've got a great asset management system. We come in, ask them a couple questions, their head hits the table and they're like, I don't have a good asset management. Because asset management to us is 4 key categories. It's data, or the information that you're trying to protect. It's the technology, the hardware and software that data is on, or the people who have access to that data or need access to that data, or that data resides in their head, because we're not just looking at data in a logical form either. And then the facility. So when you can say, I know exactly what people need access to what data using what machines and what facilities, that's when you have asset management. And that's really the basis for zero trust, is saying that we only want the people who have a need to it to have access to it, based not just on them, but on the exact machine that they're using and the exact level of the data they need to use it with. That's the strategic thinking that we have. And that's what we try and preach, or teach to all the partners that we have, is saying, do you really understand what you're trying to protect? Or are you just following industry best practices? Did you pick a framework to check a box? Or are you really worried about securing something? Because I think that's really where it comes down to.
Yeah, and John was kind enough to share the link to the Instack brief, which I'll make sure that we get that link thrown through the system here, because everybody, I think, honestly, I think that's like biblical reference in my opinion as far as what ZT is today. I want to ask a big, broad question on the specific sort of application technology side from both of you. And John, I'll start with you. Would you say that it's potentially possible to solve the issue that we face in OT, ICS, SCADA systems with the application of segmentation correctly done at scale? Or is that not getting enough of it where we're actually getting ahead of the problem? Because it seems to me, if we're able to do segmentate, like when you draw your diagram, what I see there also is strategic segmentation. And I think if there's a way to get beyond just trying to solve point problems, if we're able to go broad and apply localization, isolation, why should a thermostat do something that a thermostat shouldn't do, those types of things, I think that gets us to a better place. Do you think that makes sense, or is that way off base?
No, absolutely. I mean, you're segmenting that. That's why I call it a segmentation gateway, right? Instead of a policy enforcement point, because it hits the term of segmentation. And so the segment creates the microperimeter around the protect surface, and the protect surface defines the blast radius. And the blast radius that's the most that could happen bad to an environment, and it's typically pretty small. And what's cool about that in zero trust, when you have a segmented microperimeter that defines a protect surface, you only have north-south traffic. East-west doesn't exist in zero trust environments, because it's all heading. I mean, north-south is a fake.
It doesn't really exist. Yeah,
it doesn't really exist. Oh, somebody drew
right. There's no compass rose, on digital compass rose like doing that.
Yeah, right. Yeah, but anyway, but all traffic heads one way into a microperimeter, right? Which is a form of segmentation. And in fact, in my talks, and Klint and I spoke to on the same thing in Nashville here recently. I always have a base diagram where I tell people, hey, usually you're going to start your journey by doing segmentation, and you're going to tell me that well, we had a compliance mandate or an audit that said we have to do segmentation. And I will tell them that that's the compelling event that's going to force them to do segmentation. But the only reason to segment a network, the only reason is to protect something. And that's why defining your protect surface tells you why you're segmenting. And I showed that slide in London to the CIO of one of the world's largest companies right before the pandemic at the end of 2019. And he stopped right there and he stood up. He said, hold it right here. And he stood up in front of all the IT people. And he said, so now I understand why our three-year, $2 million segmentation project failed. We didn't even know why we were segmenting. And that is a common thing that I want people to focus on. Why are you doing this? And you're doing it to protect something.
So Clint, the last piece, if you wouldn't mind expanding on that, because they capped us at about a 30-minute window here. So I just want to, from your perspective at CISA, segmentation, isolation, the control, and being able to do it with a policy capability at scale, is that force multiplier for ZT? Is that an absolute, I got to have it? Or is this a, you can do this onesie, twosie, and just continue to poke along and keep up with the pace of technology? And I know the answer, so, go ahead.
Well, I think that we can, looking at keeping up with the pace of technology, have you seen the speed at which technology moves? You're always going to be behind the curve on that one. So I would say that it's a force multiplier, definitely, and that's the way that you have to look at it. I mean, you really have to say, as John already said, what are we trying to protect and how do we really need to get out? What are the crown jewels? Although, John, I think that you said that the crown jewels isn't something that you like to use that terminology. I think you used the Secret Service.
I use crown jewels, high value assets, keys of the kingdom. I don't care what you call them. I say, yeah, I'm agreeing with you here. I think what I said in that speech is sometimes I tell people don't start there because you don't know how that system works. So start with something less critical so you don't break anything. That's what I was saying in Nashville.
I think you said that protecting the president, because the Secret Service always knows where the president is.
Right.
and it's kind of a mobile thing. But yeah, that's exactly, yes, start small, work your way. But if you don't identify what the small things are, if you don't have a prioritization list, and that's the conversation nobody wants to have in an organization. Nobody wants to say, what are our priorities? What are our mission priorities? What are our service priorities? What are our people priorities? What are our risk priorities? Is health and safety more important than making money? Is that more important than our reputation? Is that more important than uptime? What prioritizations do you have? And then how do those translate into actual operations? So like you said, going back to the IT department, if they're your architects and they don't know what you do as a business, they're going to architect based on industry best practices instead of architecting based on what you find important and how you find it important. And so that is what we're really looking at, is have a plan. That's the hardest thing, is you have to have a plan. You have to then exercise that plan. Then you have to say, how are we going to monitor and report based on the plan that we have and the exercises that we've done? That's what we stand behind, at CISA.
So what would be the thing, a takeaway from this that you would tell, and John or Clint, either one, what would you tell somebody, don't do this? There's so much advice about what to do, but what would you say if you're engaging in ZT in an OT ICS SCADA type environment? Don't do this, because I personally think it's easier to know exactly what not to do most of the time than what I should be trying to do.
Well, I'll start, because I think there's two things not to do. One is, don't listen to all the people who say you can't do OT, zero trust for OT. They're wrong, right? And they just don't like the fact that the world is changing around them, and they've got more gray in their beard than Clint and I together, because they just don't want the world to change. Secondly, start somewhere. Don't think that you got to get all your ducks lined up in a row before you can start. You can start anywhere, right? The journey of 1,000 miles begins with the first step. You don't have to know the full path, but you can start to move on it. And too many people just, well, until I get this and this and this done, then once that happens, then I'll start on my zero trust journey. And you look at their task list and you go, well, you're going to be starting this in about 10, 12, 15 years. And by that time, you're going to be toast, because to your point, the things that we did to make managing OT environments, which was give them internet access, are the things that make them most vulnerable. And so you have to start today. If I was in that environment, I would be in panic mode right now. Now is the time to panic, because the threat environment is changing. There's stuff going on, and you are very vulnerable, and critical infrastructure is going to be a target for nation state adversaries. It's at the very top of the list, and we all know that, but everybody's just waiting for somebody else to do something. And well, you know, you're bleeding and you're going, I wonder where that's coming from. Maybe I spilled some Kool-Aid.
Clint, your thoughts. What not to do?
I would say don't look for the silver bullet. We say that in IT all the time, and OT is just as, there's nobody that's going to give hand you a solution that does it for you. Find partners, not solutions. People that will help you along your line, but they're not going to be able to sell you something that does it for you. And don't discount the human factor. As John was saying, that humans are resistant to change, and the convergence of IT and OT shops, you can't discount how much of a heartache this is going to be for some of them. You have to be able to soften that blow, but you can't let it stop you. You have to push through that. You have to blend these barriers between your IT shops and your OT shops and bring them together. Find common terminologies, and that's going to be key right there, is making sure that everybody's on the same page. Understand that each of them, the priorities are going to differ on both sides of the house, but bring them together under a single terminology, and you've got to move, and you got to move now. Because as John said, the threats are real, and the threats are only going to get bigger and better.
I love that you just said find partners, not resources. I'm letting it be known I'm stealing that for my next session. So that's sage advice there. I think this was great. I think we covered a whole bunch of ground. No two better people are more qualified. Klint from CISA, John Kindervag, the godfather of ZT, talking about OT, ICS, SCADA, all those types of things. If you're looking for information, you're trying to figure out how to solve these problems, talk to these type of people. And I'd like to thank everybody for listening today.